I think I'm not done complaining about Jesus, unfortunately. And I don't remember it being a sin to question things or to criticize Jesus. But either way, I definitely feel some type of way. I did go on a very long rant about Jesus being potentially a dusty. And one of the most painful experiences growing up was being at the receiving end of narcissistic men who would promise you the world and never fulfill those promises. And when I think about Jesus, I can't help but be reminded of unfulfilled promises. And I've definitely thought about every aspect of what Jesus could have meant when he said certain things. But due to him being who he is, he's not grounded in this world. It feels like these narcissistic religious men who want to be like Jesus expect to be treated with the same amount of patience, and they never fulfill their promises whatsoever. And the absolute frustration comes when you realize it's paired with misogyny, and they will leave you stranded if that meant protecting their ego from realizing they can't do shit and they're helpless. Because it's not about you. I think about the evils within this world that were there around Jesus' time and that are here now. What always frustrated me was a lack of real action when it came to Jesus. Am I just supposed to accept the lack of real change under the guise of real change and call it a day? It feels like because Jesus had a great degree of empathy for women and the people around him, that he told them comforting things. I was looking at some historical paintings of Mary Magdalene, and it is so obvious her weakness to Jesus. There's no way she did not truly believe in him. She did. And you know what? In order to fulfill this destiny, he left Mary Magdalene behind. She was supposed to become the leader of the disciples after Jesus' passing. I don't believe it actually happened. Jesus wanted that, and it was not allowed by the men, to my understanding. What is this telling me? It's telling me that men are allowed to waste your life if they show you an ounce of compassion, but never follow through on any practical means and expect you to sustain yourself in a world that is entirely working against you. If you're lucky and you're born into a wealthy family who teach you these loopholes, maybe then can you be saved by a man who wants to use you to fund his lifestyle for his spiritual path. Only the wealthy can afford to behave as if money doesn't matter. You see that in today's time as well. There are a lot of influencers who choose to be nomads, but they have trust funds, they have businesses, they have streams of income, all while scamming you with this idea that you can live off of nothing, glamorizing homelessness and selling you this idea of a more righteous path with poverty. Do not care about material possessions, he said, for your riches are in heaven, while they steal your riches here on earth. I didn't like that Jesus did not have a big enough backbone for me. If he's really the Son of God, he would understand the foundation needs to be stable in order to thrive. I feel like my entire life has been a lie, and it's all off of the basis of someone who told quite a few people a lot of comforting lies to keep them sane in this evil world. He's metaphorically saved our souls. But what about this life? What about what's really in front of all of us? It felt like he was helpless himself and acted as if he wasn't. Am I wrong to feel this way? He performed some miracles along the way in his journey, but did he make real systematic change? The only change he made was spiritual, to open our eyes to certain things. He lived in a very symbolic way. All of it had a purpose, but that's it. Am I supposed to live with this hope that if I believe hard enough, or if I pray, if I trust in someone who only follows through sometimes, and it has to be in accordance to their divine plan, I'm supposed to trust that, and trust that there's something beyond this life if they choose not to save me, that my soul will be saved and I'll have everlasting life there. But I can't know that. So you get screwed over in the present. Christianity has taught me passivity. It's taught me submission to authority that is exploiting you. It's taught me to be blindly obedient, and questioning things would put me at risk. And I never liked this idea of promising heaven. If he is talking about the same heaven where Lucifer fell from, seems very evil to me, or misguided. If he's talking about the same heaven that Lucifer fell from, to me it implies that he's a codependent upon an abusive God. Because I've talked a little bit about how I used to think that Lucifer was the scapegoat, and it always rubbed me the wrong way that Jesus decided to come back down on earth as a flying monkey, attempting to bring him back there and convince us that that's a good place. If heaven wasn't perfect, why would I want to go up there and feel safe and worship this God forever and ever into eternity? I hope it's a different God he's talking about, because that doesn't sound like heaven to me. Sounds like literal hell. As a woman, you're conditioned to wait on a man to save you. This is very deliberate conditioning set up by a patriarchal misogynistic system, where they want the woman reliant upon the man so that he can have full control over her. And I'm supposed to wait on someone who said he'd be back. Only a few people saw him. Mary Magdalene first. I'm supposed to wait on him to come back. Save us all. Save the day. And currently it feels as if I'm let down, the same way the current men in my life have let me down, leaving me stranded. I'm not Mary Magdalene, and you sabotaged me. I feel like this sort of conditioning just wired me towards trusting unreliable sources and unreliable people. And because these unreliable people tend to be in some sort of psychosis or hypnosis, some narcissism, some bullshit, it inevitably always ends up in me being disappointed, because I'm faithless or I'm wrong if I do not believe in someone who hasn't shown up for me when I truly needed them. And if I happen to succeed in anything, I'm supposed to attribute it to him. When I cannot see him, I'm supposed to dismiss my own capabilities, because I've been conditioned to feel powerless. Because I've been conditioned to feel powerless without said invisible person who's always watching me and assessing whether or not I'm gonna actually make it into this heaven later. Heaven is invisible too, by the way. I never truly dreamt of heaven. I never fantasized about it. I surely did fear hell, though. I don't think I do anymore, because this is it. And then you also have to factor in that he doubled down and said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. It's a metaphorical and a physical place. I'm tired of the goddamn riddles. I'm tired of the standard being something intangible. This is devastating. You taught me reliance and showed me repeatedly that you cannot be relied upon. And the narcissistic men within these communities take full advantage of this hot air. Tell you anything to get you to shut up for now, to fulfill their prophecy. There's always this trope where the man saves the damsel in distress. Not all women are even sought after to be saved. You'd have to be a particular archetype, but let me just think about this from a slightly different perspective. If you can't save me, are you going to waste my life by implying that you could, in an impossible way, to save your ego? Or are you going to be honest with me and teach me how to save myself? It's incredible how women in particular learn helplessness to save a man's ego because he needs to feel needed. But I think to this extent, when it comes to religion, this is cruel. It is frequent that men have women waiting their entire lives for this supposed saving that often never happens. I wonder if Jesus is any different. I know that they said that he was perfect, he lived a perfect life, but the more that I analyze him, the more flaws I truly see. I see that he was truly a human being. Learned helplessness, waiting on a savior, was often a man. And when you do rescue yourself, it's attributed to him anyway. This is very psychologically hard. Couldn't have done it without Jesus. When my fight or flight finally kicks in and I decide to fight for my life, it was because I begged and pleaded, and just as I was about to give up, then he swooped in to save the day. That doesn't sound very compassionate. You had to let me suffer a bit. All of my suffering was for a reason that I didn't agree to. You had to let me marinate a little bit to teach me a lesson. For me to understand certain things feels like cruelty, not love. And this is mainly from the biblical God. Jesus was a lot better than that. He was truly a kind person, but I see his limitations, and I refuse to ignore that. It genuinely feels like generational trauma where Jesus wants to desperately save his mother and women like him, and goes to extreme lengths to do so. He went to the cross, bro. He was tortured. And it was a pretty brutal death, not gonna lie. And because it's such a huge guilt trip, now I have to dedicate my lifetime and energy towards a human being who's gone. And I'll have to ignore the many other people who are also crucified. But this one in particular, he suffered the most. He had the most brutal crucifixion, we think. This is so manipulative, honestly. Jesus wasn't the most dominant male. He's an INFJ beta quadra man. Yes, he had his moments. Yes, he was sassy. He was quick with the tongue. He used to roast people. He wasn't the most masculine person because he resonated and empathized with his mother so much. She was the one that indoctrinated him into believing he needed to be the savior because she was so helpless in life and desperate that she probably went into some sort of psychosis, making up or actually hallucinating this story and forcing Jesus to fulfill this in order to redeem herself or to not seem like she's crazy. He's comfortable with his feminine energy. And oftentimes when men are this way, they're emotionally intelligent, they're empathetic, they're usually not providers. They're usually not too masculine. They're the embodiment of what women say that they want, but often get away from because they're deemed as too womanly. And I heard that Jesus was actually unattractive short, had his hair cut. I'm beginning to believe that Jesus Christ represents a empathetic but lesser accomplished man's fantasy of finally being useful. And the ways in which this archetype of a man or personality type is useful is not within the physical realm. So when you follow a man who's holy, you're feeding into his delusion or his fantasy of finally winning and dedicating your entire life to it because of this misogynistic underlying brainwashing that conditions you to believe in or pity a man who doesn't provide. If someone goes out of their way to condition you to be helpless, all under the guise of saving you, then ultimately not fulfilling those promises, that's cruelty. There's nothing righteous about that. And I see that it's very normalized for us to idealize or hope that this kind of person will fulfill their promise. There's the fantasy of this holy man finally not lying to us. And if there's anything I've learned in this life, especially when it comes to such serious matters, because you do not need to succeed in everything. But in this case, trying is not succeeding. And preventing me from doing something about it, rendering me as powerless, infantilizing me as a sheep on God's pasture, by the way, does me no good. Ultimately, in the end, sheep get slaughtered. Usually while they're young and naive. If not, they'll be used for wool. But they have a purpose on that pasture, don't they? Because otherwise, other animals have to go out and fight for themselves. They're not livestock, though. It feels as if religion has set you up to accept literal disrespect and humiliation in scripture. The way that this biblical God sees you as a good thing. Oh, we're his sheep. We're his little sheep. I always wondered why being called a sheep was an insult. It's usually because they're very dumb. They're much lower on the food chain. Some of them end up on their backs and die because they can't roll over to save their lives. I've seen a lot of sheep farming. And you know what? I love me some lamb. It's in season right now, by the way. You want to get them when they're 6 months or less, while the meat is still fresh and not too tough to indoctrinate, so that it can nurture me. Because that's what we raised it for. That's what we conditioned it for. Oh, don't escape. That's a sin. Don't question this. You're a little dumb sheep, and you're meant to nourish me. Oh, you want to experience real love? You need to get away from the materialistic. This is an angle a lot of men currently come from as a means to hide their insecurity in the fact that they may not be financially stable, or they're unwilling to provide for you because they see themselves as higher value than the women that they use, exploit, and steal ideas from. I understand Jesus' message, preaching love, but this does not seem like love to me. And if I am someone whose love language requires for you to give me things, I'm never going to feel it. Because you giving me stuff, you providing me stuff, directly contributes to my ability to survive or take care of myself. Therefore, that's actually not love. I think that What more do I personally need spiritually? I feel I have a very abundant spiritual life, if it means anything. I personally feel very filled with love. Do I need more of that from someone else who ultimately feels that if I do not love them, I cannot love myself? That feels like a gaslight. And loving yourself is demonized. Loving yourself outside of God isn't seen as good because it's seen as worldly and is automatically attributed to you having no morality or being spiritually bankrupt. Okay, I suppose there were people who said that and not Jesus. It's easy to get everything mixed up, but Timothy 3:2, it warns against loving yourself too much, essentially just becoming a narcissist. And this is weaponized, and loving yourself is demonized within the church because these pastors are often narcissists. They don't want you to love yourself too much, so they actively indoctrinate you to keep your self-esteem in the gutter, all while promising to save you in some way, and never doing it. Seems familiar, doesn't it? Seems like a fucking pattern. I'm to listen to these people if it means saving my soul. The focus has always been on something intangible or something inherent to my experience as living. And if it is inherent to me, why are you attempting to control my life experience? I'm inherently spiritual. I'm human. I am of the flesh and the spirit. I am conscious. And if there is a God, I am fundamentally connected to this network, regardless of what you say, do, or indoctrinate me into believing. But I have to wonder, did Jesus love himself all that much? He literally made himself a sacrifice, physically, spiritually. Because God so loveth the world, he gave his only begotten Son, so that whoever shall believe in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Jesus was a sacrifice. If we're children of God, I am a daughter of God, Jesus is the Son of God. He said begotteth, right? And that means genetically, he would be the Son of God. And if we look into it scientifically, we literally all are. But when I look at Jesus, he doesn't seem to have healthy self-esteem. He's portrayed as frail, weak, self-sacrificing, empathetic. Yeah, he had a backbone every now and then. But what person with good self-esteem chooses to be homeless and literally decides to sacrifice themselves on a cross if that meant proving a point for thousands and thousands of years to come after his own death? He didn't portray a healthy self-esteem, in my opinion. I think that Jesus had terrible self-esteem, awful self-esteem. To me, it seemed he was depressed at all times. And his entire life was a struggle and a plea out to God. I believe he endured ruthless harassment and bullying from being born of Mary due to that predicament. And also when he decided to leave his hometown, he even talked about not being accepted within it. You can clearly see that he endured a lot of emotional pain, and his energy from a lot of scriptures simply comes off as defeated. So defeated, in fact, that he's given up on this world. Let's go to another realm. Let's go to the real kingdom of heaven, because I'm tired of this place. He believed in hell being on earth so much that he willingly let himself be crucified to prove a point and also dip. If you think about Yahweh, who was originally a storm god, who stole and merged himself with other gods, later claiming to be the one and only God, when it used to be acknowledged that there were many by the Israeli people. If that's the God that Jesus wants us to go back to, that would overtly display to me that Jesus is a codependent and has extremely low self-esteem because he's been abused by this tyrant. What father is comfortable with their child, or even more satisfied with their child being tortured and dying for other people to be saved? It sounds like some sort of sick amusement. It sounds psychopathic. Don't you agree? Yahweh is a war god. That's why the Old Testament is mostly just a war manual. He's a psychopath, bro. By all clinical means, he's a psychopath. I've genuinely always seen Jesus as a tragedy. He was a victim of his mother, his own parents, and he's a victim symbolically of this Yahweh. He is both divine and of the flesh. In a cruel way, Jesus was hoping that God in heaven, or Yahweh, was better than his family here on earth, believing that we could finally find redemption through him. Because from my perspective and my observations, Mary, his mother, was likely deeply traumatized. They come from generational abuse, and here's why. She became pregnant between the ages of 12 to 14. Now, while she could have went out and did this herself, she was already religiously conditioned at a young age to be vulnerable to this sort of religious psychosis that triggers mental illness and yet condemns it at the same time. So when she was in a desperate situation as falling pregnant unwed, she may have hallucinated, or she may have actually believed that something divine was happening. And then I'd have to wonder, who really impregnated Mary? And why was her husband Joseph barely mentioned? Why was he so silent about what was happening? It was if he kept quiet to stay out of the drama, or to remove himself from this insane story. He was a supporting character, and he may have rescued Mary from possible sexual assault if he himself did not secretly do it. But they were wed. He protected her image, or at least helped, by keeping quiet and allowing her to fall into this delusion and narcissism. Because I do believe that she was a narcissist of some kind. And I believe that because she went to great lengths in order to force Jesus into this mold of being an INFJ, Enneagram 1, into being this savior, into having his entire destiny already shapen for him in order to keep his mother safe. And he went to extreme lengths to fulfill the destiny forced onto him. He silently resented his mother, yet had great empathy for her. He had terrible self-esteem because she was a narcissist. And it's a tragedy what happened to her. if that's what happens. But there was a time in biblical history where Jesus was essentially embarrassing his family by speaking out and doing certain things. And Mary went out trying to find Jesus because she thought, you're embarrassing me and you're going to look crazy. Why would she think that Jesus would look crazy if she herself forced this destiny onto him that is literally crazy? If she wasn't actually guilty of lying or ashamed because she knows that she's mentally ill and delusional. Why would she go to such lengths to protect her own image when it doesn't directly involve her? When he's attempting to save other people, really, because he's realizing that this family system is flawed. And he says that his disciples are his family. He's like, where are my brother and where are my mother? This is my family. And who's so desperate to go homeless than to be around your family? If that meant fulfilling your God-given role. I see a lot of scapegoats doing that right now. I literally said before that a friend of mine said that they would rather be homeless than go back to their family. So why was Mary afraid that Jesus would simply embarrass him simply by doing what he was already groomed and conditioned to do? If she wasn't a narcissist who's embarrassed by everything and wants to control the narrative. Jesus talked a lot about betrayal, and his main purpose was to show people non-duality through his sacrifice. But he did not like earth. He spoke of not being accepted by the people in his hometown. He knew that he was hated. He said that, remember that they hated me. If you realize that people hated you, there's nothing new under the sun. But it genuinely feels that when following Jesus or this religion, it puts you in a defeatist mindset in the same way that he was. He didn't exactly seem empowered. He tried to encourage us. But from my perspective, it seems he was just really ready to die. And you see the same attitude in a lot of Christians. A lot of people who follow him, they just don't want life. And I feel this is where a lot of my depression has come from, because of this religious conditioning and to not accept this world whatsoever. And I know that this world does suck. It really does. But it feels like it just trains you to be cowardly and not truly stand up for things, but only do it passively or spiritually, and then get out of the way and let evil prevail because Satan rules this place anyway. It's setting you up to be defeated by the enemy for the most part. And even in the Old Testament, Yahweh, he's from a storm god. He was a god of war, essentially. And he led the Jews to be brutal. That's why the Old Testament is a war manual. You see that a lot of their strategies are cruel and extreme because you need to win at all costs. And Jesus, being the codependent son of God that he is like, no, love, peace, turn the other cheek. But in this world that we live in, people wanted or needed this sort of God to be brutal, to defeat other crazy groups of people who also had different war gods. The beta quadrant energy it's us versus them. Religion has a lot of beta quadrant energy. Us versus them. There will never be peace. Jesus is supposed to be that peace. And we find that kingdom within ourselves. And that's it. Because Yahweh is still the God at the end of the day. So why would Jesus replace that? He may be a part of God. He so claims. And I always thought that was him being the child of a narcissist, Mary and God, who cannot have an identity outside of himself. But obviously, with narcissists, they always cause a split within themselves. They separate their good qualities and their bad qualities. They put it onto their children. Now, Jesus is attempting to save the reputation of both of his parents, if we're talking hypothetically. It's always felt like he's trying to show us a different side to this abuser, this tyrant. And Yahweh, being the storm god that he is, consumed other gods, defeated other gods, merged with them, and claimed to be the only one. If we really look at Yahweh historically, it's very obvious that he's actually a demon, if that is such a real thing. Now, I've always assumed that he's a psychopath of some sort, but it would really explain a lot, because that's beyond normal narcissism, isn't it? Jesus, Satan, pinned against each other, both thrown onto earth to defeat one another for his own entertainment, torturing children, can fix things whenever he wants but chooses not to, because that would be less fun. All of this is a sick projection of the unconscious mind of the man who wrote the Bible. All of it reflects human nature, human intent. They tell you that God inspired them or God spoke through them. These men think they are God. I refuse to believe that the true creator of this world is as cruel and undignified. And this is why I do not believe that Jesus Christ can be trusted, because he's a codependent who is desperately trying to save the reputation of his narcissistic parents, Mary and God himself, Yahweh himself. You cannot trust a codependent or anyone who still believes in the lies of a psychopathic monster who will, through their love, empathy, and compassion, codependency, talk you into going back to someone like that. Because they themselves are broken. So currently, and for the past 14 years, I've seen a lot of followers of Jesus who finally had their psyche absolutely demolished by the Christian, church. They had their psyches broken, okay? I've seen them follow out this path of Jesus, ending up homeless, sabotaging themselves, making themselves out to be a target, to become a scapegoat, because they believe that they have to be the Jesus in these scenarios. And, Jesus wasn't liked until he died. And it took many years after he died for people, or the majority of people, to go along with it. That's how it works, right? I've seen a lot of people, including myself partially, lose out in life because following Jesus honestly puts you into a loser mindset. It puts you in a place of victimization. Because at the end of the day, he didn't do much. There are a lot of things still happening now that happened during Jesus' time. He didn't stop any of it. I don't want to follow him anymore. I know it's been 2 seconds since I decided to do so, but I don't want to do it anymore. Religion for me has been a tool to remove certain traumas by countering it with Jesus, because it took me using Jesus to get out of certain psychological binds. And now that I'm out of many of those binds, I'm seeing the other bind within the bind, the other matrix within the matrix. We're still in a matrix. of some sort. And for this one, I'm done. He was a man. He was a human. It was very selfless of him to do so, but he was a victim of narcissistic abuse just like us. And there's nothing that he is teaching that we couldn't have found out through other religions or understandings, or, I believe that Hinduism is actually the oldest religion. There were religions before Christianity and Judaism, before these Abrahamic religions, but Jesus wanted to show us non-duality. His death represented that. It's all symbolic and non-practical. I don't personally feel that I need it at the moment, so I guess I'm done complaining. This turned out to be longer of a rant than anticipated, but this is how it's been going for me lately. But I hope you're taking care. Do whatever you need to keep sane. Follow your own path, and I'm gonna go. Peace.